Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving into yet another video covering one of the notorious Aeldari units. A unit that I like to refer to as the caterpillar of the Aeldari, simply because it is good at all stages of its life cycle. So basically, really cool unit that has formed a staple in Eldar lists since the beginning. So, of course, I'm talking about the lowly Guardian Defender, the unit that people usually pick up first for the Aeldari, or at least used to way back in the day, and a unit that is still quite good to this day. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because a couple of people here and there have been disparaging the Guardian Defender, but I actually think the Guardian Defender is key to understanding the Eldar, how to play them, and how to master them as a faction, because the Guardian is actually an extremely good teaching tool that works well at high levels of play also once you do master the basics and even the advanced tactics of the Aeldari. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right in. So in today's video, we are going to be covering the datasheet itself. We're going to be talking about why the Guardian Defenders are the perfect starter unit for the Aeldari. And we're going to be talking about the life cycle of the Guardian Defenders for Aeldari players in the current edition. So looking at their datasheet, it is pretty unassuming, and a lot of people wouldn't be faulted for thinking this is a weak datasheet, especially when you compare them to other armies, right? They're noticeably weaker than things like intercessors. They have an additional movement over, your basic intercessor, but less toughness, less save, less wounds, less leadership. Same OC, but, obviously that's a lot less durable, right? On top of this, we look at the weapons, and although you do get a heavy weapon in the unit via the heavy weapon platform, their basic weapons are not as good, right? They have assault, they have 18-inch range, which is less than the intercessors, and they have 2 shots apiece, which kind of averages out if you kind of do the math on 5 intercessors versus 10 guardians, but less range, obviously less access to hard-hitting abilities like Oath of Moment, but otherwise they're basically bolt rifles, which don't have heavy, but they do have assault. In combat, they're obviously terrible with only 1 attack at weapon skill 3, strength 3, so this is one of those units that right away as an Aeldari player you can identify is something that doesn't want to be in close combat at all. It's kind of like Tau have a horrible stat line in combat, and Eldar Guardians kind of the same way. You really don't want these engaged, if possible. There will be some instances where you will do it, but only against units that can't swipe you and kill you in one phase. As for their keywords, they have a lot of the same keywords as other battle line units, which include infantry, battle line, and grenades. As for their actual abilities, they don't really have any core abilities except for their faction ability, which is battle focus. Their datasheet ability is fleet of foot, so you can perform the fade back agile maneuver without spending battle focus, and it can do so even if other units have done so, or, it doesn't prevent you from using it with other units as well if this unit used fade back first, which is really cool. And of course you have crude platform, which just means that once all the Guardians are dead, the platform is also destroyed. So, honestly, at its face, right, just on paper, this datasheet doesn't look that strong, but the key lies in the details. Because of the fleet of foot ability, you are really relying on a deep intertwined knowledge of the army rule, which is battle focus. And if you guys don't know, fade back allows you to move after being shot at. So you get to move d6 plus 1 inches in any direction you choose after all of those attacks are resolved. And that's going to basically be the gateway into teaching Eldar players the way you need to play Eldar. Okay, so having said that, why is the Guardian Defender unit the perfect starter unit for the Aeldari? So I think it all comes down to this free fade back reactive move, which really teaches the fundamentals of the faction in 10th edition, of course, of the Codex, to the Eldari player. But it also has another function. It also shows your opponents the ways that can be gotten around. Because playing against Eldar can sometimes be a little frustrating if the opponent doesn't know any of their rules. But if they start to understand the different interactions, then they can work around them. So, fade back being a reactive move, very basic maneuver. A lot of factions do have reactive moves of sorts, so this does teach newer players as well maybe some better ways of dealing with it, which is nice. I always like units that have rules that are, somewhat enjoyable for the player and also for the opponent. Now, this rule synergizes really well with the basic Farseer also, and the Farseer is a classic starting character for the Aeldari. The old combat patrol came with Guardian Defenders and a Farseer, of course, along with jet bikes and a Wraithlord. Very good combat patrol, but essentially the Farseer itself is able to boost the Guardians to a level where they can actually do some damage at range. And what this does is it forms the foundation of something we're going to, learn as more advanced Eldari players in the current edition with our current codex, which is the Guardian brick. And this brick is going to be a fundamental unit in certain detachments. And actually, it can be quite good in several of the detachments, not just Guardian Battle Host. So, yeah. So this is really where it's at for why this unit is a good starting unit. It has a very easy to understand and interact with rule for the player and also the opponent, because basically it's not impossible to deal with, but it does add a level of, tactical advantage for the Aeldari player that your opponent has to find a way around. Okay, so the life cycle of the Guardian Defender, I think, is one of the most important parts to understanding how to play Eldar at a fundamental level. So the first stage of its life cycle is the caterpillar. It's vulnerable, it's crawling on the forest floor, it's learning how to avoid predators because, in essence, the caterpillar is very soft, very squishy, just like the Guardian Defenders, right? Guardian Defenders just on their own are a horde unit, basically, right? They're going to die very easily. They're low toughness, low armor save, and yes, a 4+ in this day and age is kind of a low armor save, let's be real. And, obviously having one wound apiece, not going to be, winning any durability contests. So what this does is it teaches the Aeldari player that they really need to understand distancing and disengagement, especially when you consider using their fade back or free fade back ability via their datasheet. And it really emphasizes the importance of positioning on or around terrain, which is another big factor to playing Eldar. Successful Eldar players will use terrain to the utmost. And, really an Eldar unit caught in the open is either something that a good Eldar player gives up and does on purpose to score an objective, or it's simply an error, right? So learning these things early on will help an Eldar player grow and become more skilled. So the next stage of the life cycle is the cocoon. And the cocoon is when the Eldar player starts to learn all of the weaknesses of the reactive move. So the limitations, basically, of what this reactive move can do. For example, in 500-point games, that reactive move might be very powerful, might be very good, especially if your opponent is maybe using something other than just straight up intercessors that can just wipe them in one go, right? Maybe a couple plasma attacks hit them, they can fall back behind terrain, and you can get multiple turns out of your Guardian Defenders. But in higher point games, you will quickly learn that this reactive move is actually not wholly useful if you're using the unit as a forward unit, which means you're using it to capture objectives and, kind of more on the front lines. So this teaches you that you have to be more defensive with Guardians. You have to kind of, like a cocoon, right? Hide in the back, hide somewhere safe, and just bide your time for the right moment to strike. And this leads a lot of players into the role of Guardian Defenders being a screening unit or a unit that is going to cover their home field objective, which is a very viable way to use them. However, in the cocoon, you're thinking about different ways to use this unit. You start to realize that there's a lot of potential in the Guardian Defender brick, right? Being able to attach a Farseer to them, allowing the unit to have a really powerful Bright Lance attack that can get 8 damage automatically, or automatically hit or wound if you fail to wound or hit. So you have this super reliable Bright Lance that can shoot at a long range, and your opponent needs to, shoot long range things back at you. But if they don't have a lot of firepower to kill the whole unit in one blast, then you can just hide, right? So your opponent really needs to wipe you out with a single unit. They can't afford to just pepper you down because you can always fall back. Warlocks are also very good, not only for denying charges via the character Warlock, but also for the Flamers and the -1 to wound that the Warlock Conclave gives. And of course, you also have the support weapons, either the Vibro Cannon, if you're taking multiple of those in Guardian Battle Host or something like that, the D cannon for heavy, large targets that you want to blow up from indirect or, behind line of sight. And then you have, of course, the Shadow Weaver, which is good at killing horde units and slowing units down. And finally, we come to the last stage of the life cycle, the butterfly. So this is when you start to learn the ideal detachment synergies for maximum effectiveness of Guardian Defenders. You start to realize that Guardian Defenders can't just be a defensive unit because there are better units for it, right? Simply speaking, for example, we have a unit like Storm Guardians, which provides sticky objectives. Now, a sticky objective unit, is better for guarding your home because it doesn't have to worry about getting battle shocked. So being able to transition from a defensive unit to an offensive unit and kind of, learning how reserve play works into learning and mastering the core aspects of Guardian Defenders is also really important, right? They're good with a number of detachments, but the detachments are most effective in are when you can maximize that transition. And, transitioning between, of course, a defensive unit that is guarding a position on the battlefield to something that's offensive, which is taking advantage of your opponent's positioning and certain factors in the game. So, this leads a lot of players into the mindset of Guardian Defenders as a unit that is good in armies like Warhost, right? Or detachments, I should say. Warhost, Guardian Battle Host, Seer Council. All three of those detachments are, thought of to be maybe a little bit more on the defensive side, not so much Warhost, but definitely Guardian Battle Host and Seer Council are seen as more defensive. But being able to learn how to transition into an offensive state with your units is a core aspect of how you play Aeldari effectively. Not every detachment plays this way, but a lot of Eldar detachments do. So being able to, make that swap, that transition very quickly on the fly, and being able to recognize these things in the game is a big part of how to be successful with the faction. And Guardian Defenders exemplify this to a great degree. And me having played a lot of Seer Council, having played Guardian Battle Host quite a few times, I can tell you that knowing this will help you play the detachment so much better. And obviously, I know a lot of people don't play Guardian Battle Host at a competitive level, but I believe it's actually one of the best detachments in the entire codex because it doesn't play the same game that the other detachments play. And it actually has a very, very hard, stratagem to deal with, which of course is the cost of victory stratagem, which allows you to resurrect guardians infinitely as long as they are not destroyed and as long as you have command points and you're not engaged with enemy units. Okay, so that is going to wrap up our talk about the Guardian Defenders. And honestly, they are a good unit. I know they've gotten some crap in the past, but don't let, people tell you that they're not a good unit. I think they're one of the best ways to learn the Eldar, and obviously they're really cool models. I mean, in my honest opinion, they are one of the quintessential looking models for the general aesthetic of the Aeldari. So, really cool unit. Now, before we end this video, there is something we need to address as a community. And of course, this is going to be especially important in transition periods from, 10th edition to 11th edition. And that is going to be, where are the Eldar going to fit in 11th edition? What is GW going to take away potentially? Or what is GW going to give us in the new edition to either kill us as a faction, which they have done in the past, I don't put it past GW, or, make us really strong. And I think the key to this lies in a compromise that I've brought up on this channel many times, and that I think would be a very good path into making Eldar feel like Eldar and retain that identity, while at the same time, basically not killing the faction competitively. They can compete and stuff like that. Because, a lot of the community, I will say this, they have a very kind of backwards mindset on how well the Eldar have done from edition to edition. If you were not an Eldar player, for example, you would have not known this, right? Because maybe the one Eldar player that you ever met that was a really good player and knew the rules, to the T, beat you really bad, and then from then on you had like a really salty experience against Eldar. And that's what's happened to a lot of players out there. But there have been editions. There have been periods of time of years and years where the Aeldari were not good. Even with a very popular and quite effective rule set. And of course that rule set is the move, shoot, move ability, battle focus, right? Now, it wasn't always called battle focus. In past editions, like in 3rd or 4th edition, it was simply called the jetpack rule. Jetpack units, by the way, like Tau units, could, instead of assaulting something, charging something, they could just move 6 inches in any direction. So this basically was the birth of move, shoot, move. Jet bikes had this. Eldar jet bikes had this. Tau battle suits had this. And of course, warp spiders to a lesser degree had this. Although there were some risks associated with doing this type of move in certain editions because of the prevalence of what we call dangerous terrain tests. So flying units that landed within terrain using their fly rules had to take something called a dangerous terrain check, which mitigated, in reality, these moves weren't all that strong. Even back in the day, they weren't the dominant way in which people played. And I'll go into why a little bit later or maybe down the road, but in 4th edition, in 5th edition, move, shoot, move type of abilities were not considered to be that powerful. And there were several reasons for this, but it was a mechanic that people did not like, simply because they wanted to be able to shoot the opponent. And when they couldn't shoot the opponent, that was a big problem. In 5th edition, it wasn't that big of a deal because true line of sight existed. But in 4th edition, when forests and terrain pieces could block line of sight if you couldn't see 3 inches or more into it, then that could be a potential issue. However, again, it wasn't a dominant playstyle at the time. Now, in this day and age, there is a lot of move, shoot, move in the game. And I recently got a comment on one of my videos that was, I think, and here's the thing. I don't want to call out this person, and I certainly don't want to infer that, they don't know what they're talking about or they've missed the mark in any way, due to, pride or, things like, I don't know, lack of information, lack of whatever, right? Lack of knowledge about the game, etc. But I do want to address it because I think the opinion that this person had is actually an opinion that is shared by a lot of people in the game. And one of the reasons that I really chose to talk about this a little bit is because I think this person is genuinely not trying to be kind of a rager. I think this is a common perception in the Warhammer community that people hate. People hate move, shoot, move. So let's go and address it. So this person, I won't say what their, username is or whatever, but in a recent video, they had basically commented this, and I wasn't really going to interact with it because when I first read it, I thought it was just uninformed. And that was kind of my opinion on it. I was like, you know what? This person is very uninformed. I think they took what I said out of context and so forth, and I'm just going to ignore it. But I actually do think a lot of people think this. Now, we're going to address a few things really quick. We're going to read this out, and then I'm going to talk about it and, kind of explain my reasoning for, talking about the points that I made in this video here, which was, will 11th edition finally give the Aeldari the love they deserve? So I would actually argue that although Eldar were very powerful throughout 10th edition was not a edition in which the Eldar received a whole lot of love. Now, I define love for a faction as the faction identity is strong. Not just the rules are strong, but the faction identity is strong. They're fun to play, they're engaging, and also, they're not in a position where they're consistently nerfed, right? Which has happened a ton in the past, where Eldar come out very strong. They have a couple of strong mechanics. Those mechanics are slowly nerfed into the ground and degraded, and then they're never really given any, tender loving care afterwards to bring them back in a different way, a different direction. So, let's go and read this out. So his first sentence, I understand this channel is largely rage bait / Eldar propaganda, but I want to attempt to engage with this honestly. Okay, so, first of all, my channel is not rage bait. I just want to make that clear. I don't think anybody actually thinks that plays Eldar and watches the channel. Now, some of you may think some of the thumbnails are a little bit, I don't know. For some people, they're rage-inducing because I have the soy jack and stuff on there with the Space Marine player and stuff. I get it, right? But honestly, isn't that the truth? Isn't the Space Marine player or whoever, always complaining, always crying about not having something when they actually get everything, right? Isn't that the truth? So, not every Space Marine player, obviously, but there are some that do that. And there are some players in general who do that in the hobby. So I mostly just do that as a joke. It's not to rage bait anybody. If you see that and you think, oh, that's me, then maybe that's a little bit of projection, right? Like, if you play Space Marines, it's fine. I'm not against Space Marine players. There's a lot of cool Space Marine players. One of my best buds is a Space Marine player. There are several Space Marine players that play in my group. Actually, as a matter of fact, all of them play Space Marines in some way, shape, or form, So it's not a big deal. I'm not anti-Space Marine. Okay, so Eldar propaganda. Obviously, propaganda is when something isn't true, when you're, spouting lies about something or misconstruing something on purpose to gain advantage, ideological advantage or whatever. I'm not doing that because I just want the Eldar community to finally be recognized, and I want GW to put more attention into crafting better, rules that everybody can enjoy and stuff like that. So, that's all. It's not propaganda. But we're going to ignore that first sentence because I don't think it really gets to the point. Now, the point of his argument is this. I think the reality is the design of the Eldar that has existed for editions now is not savable. They just need a complete fundamental redesign. Anti-interaction as a basic building block of your faction just doesn't pass the vibe check. I'm sorry, it's wretched. Now, I will talk about this more in a second, but I will say that Eldar is not an anti-interaction faction. We have units that have move, shoot, move, which is considered anti-interaction for a lot of people, but here's the thing. Anti-interaction at its core means that there is no way that you can interact with that unit. For example, no interaction is like deep striking your unit, doing something, and then immediately pulling them back. Anti-interaction is like the old Baharath Seer Council thing, where people were basically, teleporting Baharath in, doing the grenade ability, and then sucking them back into a position where nobody could do anything about it. They couldn't get charged, they couldn't get shot at, nothing, because they could move anywhere on the battlefield. That's anti-interaction. Shooting something at 18 inches and then moving 6 inches back so that you're about 24 inches away from the enemy lines is not really anti-interaction because your opponent could do something about it. There are a lot of units in the game with a lot of speed that could catch up to that unit and destroy it in combat. Right? So it might be a little harder to interact with that unit. I will say that. It might be, even for some factions, really hard. You might need like a 10-inch or a 9-inch charge to be able to interact with that unit. Now, in some cases, I do agree that like things like hopping back into a transport may be just too many levels of protection. So that's something that could be addressed. So let's talk about that in a second. Now, the next thing he says is giving more fire and fade and more I shoot you now I'm gone, hee hee, is not the way to fix the faction. Now, I will say this. I've never said this. I've never said that the entire army or more units should have fire and fade, right? Now, what I did say is I think fire and fade should be good. It's a one use only item or stratagem. You can only use it on one single unit, and I think it should be good. Now, I do think fire and fade is good, actually. What I thought was a little bit too good is the Skyborn and fire and fade combo, where you could do both of them in the same turn over and over and over again with units that had a long range and that were very well protected by transports. That's a little bit much. But, allowing one unit to do it for a 2 CP cost, for example, I don't think would be out of this realm of thinking in 10th edition. Remember, everything I say is in the context of 10th. There's a lot of other units that have reactive moves and also that have move shoot move abilities within other factions. I will prove it in just a second. Now, the next thing he says is he quotes me, which actually I did say something like this. It wasn't exactly this, but I did say something like this. Literally everyone has this. Now, what I did say is everybody has reactive moves, and a lot of factions out there, not every single faction, but a lot of factions out there have move shoot move abilities, and I'll prove it in just a second. Basically what I did is I looked up 5 or 6 or 7 of the units that came to mind when I think of move shoot move, and I just posted them just as proof, just so we can kind of eliminate that as a argument that people make, right? So we'll do that in a second. So he says no they don't, and where it exists it is disgusting and the community hates it. I actually would disagree. I don't think the community hates move shoot move. I think what they hate is Eldar. And when Eldar specifically have move shoot move, then they hate it. But they don't hate it when Dark Eldar have it. They don't hate it when other factions have it. So let's be clear on that. Now next he says, I assume you're referring to the Twin Blades mainly. And no, I wasn't. The Twin Blades are OP for many reasons. It's not the move shoot move ability itself. The unit literally everyone thinks is overpowered and needs to have like 50% of its data sheets removed. I will say, it's ironic that you agree when you start complaining about the pervasiveness of 2+, 4++ by saying it feels really bad when you can't interact. So when I say can't interact, I mean basically something's unkillable. Like for example, the Necron blob. In some cases, it's going to be scoring objectives all game, right? Scoring points all game, but you can't actually kill it with a lot of things, and you can't OC it, so there's just no way to properly play the game with a unit like that with some armies. So it's a little bit too tough, right? There's things in the game right now that are very strong because they are super tough. And I think a wide amount of the community says, yeah, that's true, right? That's something that a lot of people are saying should happen in 11th edition, that the invul should be reduced because there's too much 4++ out there. There's too many invul saves out there. And it's making the game harder for, some factions. But anyway, it's not uninteractive though. It's just you can't interact with it in an objective way. You can obviously interact with it by shooting it. You can go on the objectives. It's just not going to achieve anything. That's the thing, right? But it's not totally uninteractive. There are things that can do it. It's just very limited. Now, the next thing he says is where I kind of draw the line here. It says, and then say, we need to be uninteractable. So I never said that. I said that it is okay for a unit or two maybe, right, in an army to be more uninteractable in that they have a move shoot move ability. But again, I would argue move shoot move is not always uninteractable. As a faction that is extremely fragile, right? I mean, my faction doesn't have a ton of 2-up, 4-up, right? It just doesn't. It's very fragile. So having a unit or two that is, harder to interact with is important for the faction's survival. Okay, so really, I mean, he says the doublethink is kind of crazy here. I don't think this is doublethink because we're talking about two completely different interactions. One interaction is I can't possibly kill this, right? And then the other interaction is I'm moving behind terrain. There are things that can kill it, but it's just hard to get there. And it really depends on the matchup, and it really depends on the rest of my army. But there is a way to play around move, shoot, move. There's not a way to play around something being so tough you can't kill it, right? So, and again, for example, the move, shoot, move unit cannot reliably score points on objectives. It's a damage dealer, right? So you have Dire Avengers or you have Fire Dragons. You used to be able to do with Fire Dragons anyway. They're a damage dealing unit. So they're going to, kill targets and then hop back in the Servant. I get it. That's annoying for some people, but it's definitely not scoring you points every turn. It's just allowing your other units to score more. That's all. Okay, now let's move on to the second paragraph because I actually agree with a lot of this second paragraph. He says, I don't disagree with a lot of the stuff like the Force Org chart returning at least partially. I don't think Force Org should return, but I do think battle line units should be included in the army. Psychic needs to have a bigger role. Some core strats are way over the top. I also think most of the proposed changes to the units are fine. Couldn't disagree more empathetically about bringing back rules of ignoring. So and I'll just summarize this, he's talking about ignoring rules like ignore invul saves. The problem with saying that ignore type rules, like I ignored this or I ignored that, and saying that's a problem in the game, is that it's always been a part of the game in some way, shape, or form forever, right? I ignore your armor save. I ignore this. I ignore that. That's been a part of the game. Like I ignore dangerous terrain checks. I ignore terrain. I ignore your models when I'm moving over them, right? Like there's a lot of things in the core rules that just tell you, yeah, this is how it normally works, but if you have this ability, you can ignore it, right? So there's a ton of things in the game that do that. Lethal hits, ignore the wound roll, right? Simple. Every army almost has lethal hits, so every army is ignoring the rules in some way. Same thing with dev wounds. Every army has some access to devs, right? Well, dev wounds ignore invuls and armor. So therefore, ipso facto, you're ignoring the rules. So I don't think it's far-fetched to have something ignore invuls, but I don't necessarily think that it needs to be in the edition if invuls are reduced. Okay, so let's go ahead and break it down a little bit. Here's my official response to this. Right, so the first thing he said, I'm just going to quote it, the design of the Eldar that has existed for editions now is not savable. They just need a complete fundamental redesign. My question would be, how would you redesign them so they still feel like a, scalpel, right? Because that's what the army is. It's a scalpel. It's specialized units. How do you do that? Do you price them so low that it becomes a horde army? Right? Because if it's a scalpel and it kills, it's supposed to trade up against units. That's what scalpels do. They're designed to kill one thing. Once they do that job, then their role is done and they die usually. But if you price them too high, then they can no longer do that effectively. And essentially the scalpel becomes overrated, which has happened in past editions. On the other hand, you can give the Eldar more durability, and I've heard people say this a lot, especially newer players. Give Eldar Space Marine stats. Guys, if we are turning every single unit into Space Marines for the sake of balance, what is the point of playing the game and having different factions? Right? And I hate to bring this up, but I mean, I know Space Marine players love their Space Marines and everything, but I guarantee you, if everything was Space Marines, they'd probably still dislike the Eldar, right? I mean, let's be real here, right? They would still dislike the Eldar because the Eldar do things differently. But if everything was the same, wouldn't matter, right? And maybe they wouldn't care as much. I don't know. But I certainly wouldn't like them as a faction. I know a lot of Eldar players just wouldn't play Eldar if they were just Space Marines with different models. Now, I will also say this. Multiple factions have units or stratagems that move, shoot, move. I will provide those examples in a second, like I stated, but this is not an Eldar thing alone. This is a ton of factions, and nobody's really mad at a lot of these factions, and I'll go into why in a second. And the design itself, the move shoot move, has existed for the entirety of the game. You are right, it has existed for editions now, but not just the Eldar. It's existed in a lot of armies out there. And I do believe the key to balancing this lies in the activation condition or risk of use, which has been used in past editions to mitigate the effectiveness of move shoot move. Now, the activation condition is something we'll talk about in just a second, but risk of use could also be something, right? Risk of use is like every reaction move is not 6 inches anymore. It's, d6 plus 1, right? Maybe d6 plus 2, whatever. So there's more variability there. You might roll really bad and you won't be able to move as far, or you might move great and it's like, oh great, okay, I got to where I needed to be. People don't like that still, but there's going to be things in the game that you don't like. There's things in the game I don't like. I don't like 2 up, 4 up everywhere, but it is. So you have to adapt, right? There are things that Space Marines do that I don't like. I don't like the durability for the cost. I think they're way too durable for the cost. I think that's a complaint that a lot of people came up with throughout the edition, but they are very durable for the points they pay. I don't like that, but it is part of the game. That's their faction identity. So you roll with it and you find ways around it. And that's been the case forever. So let's talk about this, because this person stated, and I mean this in good intentions, by the way, I don't mean to call this person out. Maybe they just didn't know, right? Like, not everybody knows every army. I get it. But he says, no, they don't. Other armies don't have move shoot move, Proxy Hammer. And where it does exist, it's disgusting and everyone hates it. So obviously we've heard this, and we've heard all the units that are listed here are super overpowered and should be nerfed into oblivion, right? Well, let's take a look. The first thing we come up with, let's talk about our Dark Cousins, the Dark Eldar. The Dark Eldar have a detachment, one of the weaker detachments of the book, actually. Almost no one plays it competitively, but Real Space Raiders. One of my favorite detachments, actually, because I think it's really fun. Raid and Fade, 2 CP. You can select up to 2 Cavalite units or 1 other Drukhari unit from your army. It's any unit, by the way, not just infantry. It's not limited. Each of those units can make a normal move of up to 6. It's not d6 plus 1, it's just 6 inches. You can't select it if they're in engagement range, which obviously makes sense, and they can't charge afterward, which also obviously makes sense. So this is a move shoot move with 2 Kabalite warriors or 1 other Drukhari unit, which is extremely powerful if you think about it, because you can also, and if we look down to the bottom right there where you see the Scourges, they have a move shoot move ability as well. So in Dark Eldar, you can move shoot move up to 5 units a turn. I mean, and this is also, Kabalite warriors have sticky. So yeah, it exists in other armies, and actually more than the Aeldari. The Drukhari can move shoot move way more than the Aeldari can. Way more effectively too, because it's up to 6 inches, not d6 plus 1. And they have a lot of stuff that allows them to get back into transports after they assault. So even though that's not a move shoot move, that's still a get back into transport type of ability, right? To keep them safe. And that's not even to mention Harlequins. Now, let's look at the other armies though, because it's not just Eldar factions that have this. We have Seraphim. We have Sisters of Battle. Seraphim, right? They can move up to 6 inches after they shoot. They do have pistols, which are 12 inches, but these pistols can, they can be very powerful, and they have hand flamers, which are really strong. And when you factor in enhancements and, stuff like that, this can be quite good. So you have an 80-point unit that is fairly durable that can move shoot move. 2 bolt pistols or, 2 hand flamers. And you can have up to 2 models with 2 hand flamers each. And then the Seraphim leader, the superior, can take a plasma pistol and a bolt pistol. Or you can take Inferno pistols, guys. If you want to, reduce your range to 6, you can, go up with 2 Infernos, blast, and then fall back. So that's a move shoot move ability. Let's talk about Tyranids. Tyranids, believe it or not, have move shoot move. Where do they have it? Gargoyles. Gargoyles have the same exact ability, if you look here, as the Seraphim. They are more models, but they are a tiny bit more expensive. Their guns are more range. They have 18-inch range on their guns. And, same kind of thing. Synapse, Deep Strike, all that. So, again, move, shoot, move. Does anybody complain about gargoyles? I haven't heard anybody complain about gargoyles. Gargoyles are cool. Everyone loves gargoyles. Everyone loves Seraphim and Sisters of Battle. They're cool, right? Tau, the weebs of 40k, they have a bunch of stuff that shoots, moves. And I'm not just talking about the Twin Lance. I'm talking about other stuff. Torch Star Gambit. Your shooting phase, 1 CP, a Tau battlesuit unit that can fly, can make a normal move. Not just 6 inches, not D6 plus 1, a full normal move. Most battlesuits, by the way, move 10 inches. Yes, there are vehicles, but with a 10-inch move, they can really haul ass behind whatever safe terrain they want. 1 CP, nobody ever complains about it, and the detachment itself doesn't win that much. So, there you go. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. Let's look at the next unit. Space Marines. They have everything, right? Well, they have move, shoot, move as well, guys. Eliminators. They can make a normal move after they shoot if the Eliminator Sergeant is equipped with an Instigator Bolt Carbine. Now, obviously, this unit isn't good, but it has move, shoot, move. What it is good at doing is really, this is a sniper type unit that is designed to kill characters, right? If you look at their weapons, they're damage 3 each. So they're designed to go up, kill a character potentially, if they fail both their saves or whatever, and then move back behind terrain. If your opponent is silly enough to leave something out in the open and these guys have a, stationary target, if they remain stationary, then their weapons gain dev wounds, right? So again, not a very competitive unit, but you can use this and hop in and out of a transport as well. And then lastly, let's talk about the Adeptus Mechanicus, everybody's, loser faction for the longest time. By the way, Adeptus Mechanicus has only recently become competitive. There were long stretches of 10th edition where they sucked, but they had these guys, the Proxy Skystalkers. They have a move, shoot, move ability that's the same as, Sisters or, Tyranids with Gargoyles and Sephirim, but it's actually better. Because if they end their move within 6 inches of a friendly Adeptus Mechanicus battle line unit, which you are going to take a lot of battle line in your army, then you can move 12. So these guys have an 18-inch gun, I believe, or it's 18 or 12, but I think it's 18. They have 6 shots apiece. It's only strength 3, but these guys are very tough as well. So they can move 12 inches, shoot something at 18, and then move 12 inches back. So these guys have a really powerful move, shoot, move, and no one says jack about it. No one says these guys are OP. Why? Because they're not Eldar. They're not an Eldar unit, so people don't care. People look at other stuff in Adeptus Mechanicus and say it's overpowered. Oh, the chicken walkers are overpowered with the last cannons, or oh, that one guy, I can't remember his name, but the big tech master guy is overpowered because he gives us Oath of Moment, basically. So here's the thing. This sentence, right? Where it exists, it's disgusting and everyone hates it. It's just unequivocally not true. What people didn't like about the Eldar thing is you could get back in a transport with 2 units at once in Warhost. And you also had other stuff in the army that allowed move blocking easier and stuff like that. You could play that with other factions as well, but, Phoenix Lords are very strong, obviously, when you can do tokens. There was a lot of factors that made that strong. It wasn't the move, shoot, move. It was a lot of other stuff. Okay. So, let's quickly go over the Twin Lance, because he did bring it up. And essentially, the Twin Lance is OP, it has too many rules, blah, blah, blah. It is not the retro thrusters that are necessarily overpowered, although I will say, just saying end of the fight phase instead of end of your fight phase is diabolical. But, you could either make a normal move of up to 6 or a fallback move. Okay. I guess if you play in Retaliation Cadre, these guys can make double moves, right? They can make a move in the shooting phase, and then they can make a move in the fight phase. Oh my god, right? There's tons of reasons why this is OP. By the way, Tau win rate has gone up like 5% since these guys came out. People are using this, but I'm not really even talking about these guys because obviously, yeah, everybody knows they're OP. There's no way to, say, otherwise. It is weird when a bunch of other factions get a bunch of move, shoot, move type of abilities like this, and then they take away all the Eldar's move, shoot, move, and then they say, "Oh, Eldar, it's super OP," like they said in the balanced data slate notes, or like, "Oh, we're taking away all this hidden strength from Eldar that they get a move, shoot, move, and move back into transports and all this." We're nerfing the hell out of that, but we're gonna go ahead and give it to other factions. Right? I mean, I've been following some of the stuff that's been coming out too, like the Defiler, like anything GW wants to sell during this last quarter, they're really pushing it because, people have said it. They want to break the game before 11th edition because they want people to buy the new edition. They want people to be excited for 11th. So they're making the game a little bit broken at the end, a little brokey. Now, I will say, pretty balanced game overall. But some of these units are just really, really strong. And it reminds me of the old days. And this is one of those units. They do have a 2-up, 4-up, by the way. So, yeah, everything getting a 2-up, 4-up. I mean, that's true. Everything is kind of getting a 2-up, 4-up. And it's a little rough. Okay. So, let's end this one on a good note. I think overall, the argument that move, shoot, move is toxic falls a little flat to me because a lot of people have it in 10th edition. So if you have it throughout all these armies that I just talked about, are all of those armies toxic? Are all of those armies despicable? Are all of the... No, right? Proxy, Gargoyles, Sephrim, those aren't despicable units. Those are fine. Right? Dark Eldar is Raid and Fade, despicable stratagem. No, it's a balanced strat. Why? It's 2 CP. It's cost in effect, it's a lot of resources. So, the original argument that I made when I, way back, I'm talking about way back when I made the, I don't know if you want to call it a rage video, but it was kind of like, I did complain a little bit about the changes, the Eldar changes that they made, and rightly so, because other factions had this stuff. So that's what I was most confused about. Instead of making it 2 CP like the Dark Eldar one, they decided to just basically remove it from the codex and make it impossible, make the trigger too difficult. Now, I will say, I think there's a very easy way to fix this. And basically, this involves changing the way we think about reactive moves. Eldar needs stronger reactive moves, right? Because I never, ever would say that I want the Eldar to be uninteractable, because that's not even fun for the Eldar player, right? So I never said that. We need to be uninteractable. Some units need to be a little bit more uninteractable, or hard, I will rephrase that, harder to interact with in certain circumstances, aka harder to get shot, right? Harder to get shot from across the board. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Move Shoot Move solves for a lot of units. So in the video itself, I said we need stronger reactive moves than other factions because of the fragility and the expensive nature of Eldar units are very elite. And then I went on and I provided several examples of strats or abilities that could achieve that, so Move Shoot Move wouldn't be necessary. And that's really where I think we need to get to in the game, is that Move Shoot Move isn't necessary for these types of units because maybe they have strong reactive moves, right? Enemy unit ends a move, usually within 9, you get a move. Within 9 is a little bit too easy to get around. You could deep strike right next to the unit and you could still be outside of 9 inches, right? So maybe make it 12 inches, right? Maybe make the reactive moves on very squishy units like this 12 inches. And instead of moving D6, they can move 6, right? If you're going to make them reactive moves. Or you could have something like, a Wave Serpent being able to give Lone Op 12 to a unit that is nearby, so that it's harder to interact with by shooting them from across the board, which is always a problem, right? That's why indirect's such a problem. So that's what I really mean by that, right? I do not mean that it is impossible to interact with them and we just need a bunch of move, shoot, move. I never, ever said that. And we have had editions where everything had battle focus, and that's how you played, but there were weaknesses to it, obviously. But there were also really editions where the Eldar were just super OP because everything reactive moved. No, sorry, excuse me. Everything move, shoot, move. It wasn't a reactive move. If it was a reactive move, it'd be a little better, but when your entire army does, D6 of movement after shooting, that's a problem. Yeah, your entire army doing it, that's a little insane. There has to be some sort of limit, right? Especially in 10th edition, it just wouldn't work in 10th. But, a couple units doing move, shoot, move, like a lot of armies do, is not a big deal. So, this was a false claim, basically. So, what I want to do is I want to just prove that really quick to everybody, because anybody can just come up here and say shit about what they said or didn't say. But here's the video he was referring to. The video was what Aeldari players deserve in 11th edition. And real quick, I'm just going to play you what was said and what I said about this exact topic. I didn't say we need to be uninteractable. So let's hear this. So, how do you fix this? Well, you just make the reactive moves better. Simple, right? Instead of ending a move within 9, if you end a move within 12 of a Aeldari unit, you can go ahead and get back in the transport, right? If I'm within a certain distance of a transport, I can give my unit lone operative. And maybe not even just the 18 lone op, but the 12-inch lone op, right? You'd be like, okay, well, wave serpents, they project their shield out and they shield the, squad from harm, or they shield them from enemy vision, or whatever it is. You could have these types of reactive stratagems that don't rely on just being invulnerable forever, right? There's ways that your opponent can deal with it, but your opponent actually has to think and use their brain to deal with the stratagem, just like we have to do, right? As Aeldari players, we are problem solvers. We need to figure out ways to get around our opponent's strengths. That's what the Eldar are all about, right? That's why I like the Eldar, because it requires me to think in the game, and it really forces me to be so engaged in it. And that's the best kind of Warhammer 40k game, in my honest opinion, right? So I think if we return the Eldar to that, and maybe not give them just straight up move, shoot, move that doesn't have any triggers, right? That just is like, oh yeah, you could just get a move again after you shoot. If we give them these abilities, these reactive moves, or heck, we could even give a unit the ability to move after they shoot only if they destroy an enemy unit. See, this makes it important for the Aeldari player to plan accordingly, because if they don't plan accordingly, then that unit's not going to be able to move again, right? So you have to really plan out your turn and make sure certain things happen. Now, if dice fail you and you roll, 10 ones, that's Warhammer, and that's, you're shit out of luck, right? Honestly, I never think that anything in Warhammer should be pretty much guaranteed. Okay, so obviously that's not what I said, right? So I think here's the thing. Sometimes people hear what they want to hear. They hear an Eldar player talking, or somebody talking about, Eldar, this is what Eldar need. This is what Eldar players deserve. And that person in their mind goes, Eldar players don't deserve shit. F Eldar players, right? F Eldar, they're such a stupid faction. They go off on this tirade about it. Guys, I've heard it all. I've been playing the faction for so long. Eldar triggers people. I don't know what it is about it, but it triggers people. And what I can simply say is this, as an Eldar player myself, I have gone and played other Eldar players that were dicks back in the day. There was famously a guy that used to hang out at the shop. He played Ultramarines in Eldar. And he was a jerk. And he would make it so that you had no options, but he would also cheat, obviously, when he could get away with it. But he would also question you on all your rules and stuff like that. And it was a really bad experience. Maybe you've had an experience like that way back in the day against an Eldar player, or maybe you've gone up against an Eldar player that's really good while not being a good player yourself. And that has given you a bad experience because you couldn't kill anything. Now, what I'll say in that case is that Eldar player was probably extremely good and he was playing his best against you. And you, being a player that was inexperienced, didn't know how to deal with it at the time. But if you give it time and you study the faction a little bit, you don't have to do much on it. Just, how do you beat Eldar, right? There's a ton of videos on YouTube going into it. Then maybe you'd be more prepared for it and you wouldn't think that way about the Eldar. I play against people all the time that have problems with my Eldar and that struggle against my Eldar. And I always try to help them. I always try to give them advice on like what to do next time. And I think if, the entire Eldar community was like that and we just had an open dialogue about it, things would be a little better. But we're going to have to wait on that because, a lot of people don't say anything. They're not confrontational. They won't ask questions. They'll just have it in their mind, oh, this is an OP army, it's a broken army. But they won't understand why it's broken. So I think, unfortunately, this person missed the mark a little bit, but I think shared a sentiment that a lot of people agree with outside of Eldar players, which is the faction is not fun to play against. And they always point to move, shoot, move abilities as the reason. But as we kind of proved right here, a lot of factions have move, shoot, move. And they're not necessarily not fun to play against. So I think really what it comes down to is people not understanding the subtleties of Eldar rules. Eldar have a lot of rules. They're a very rules-heavy faction, just like Thousand Sons. Any faction with a lot of rules that you don't know feels gotcha-y because you're like, oh, wow, everything has a unique rule that I have to play around, right? So my advice to you guys out there who are struggling against Eldar and think, oh, it's all the move, shoot, move. They're so uninteractable. Ask how the ability works. Use your eyes and read. Read the ability. Everybody can read, right? Hopefully. If you can't read, you shouldn't be playing Warhammer. You should learn how to read first, okay? Because you're going to have a terrible time playing Warhammer if you can't read. So, learn the rule. Look at the rule. Ask questions, right? And you'll be good. You will learn how to play against the faction better. Okay, so thank you very much to the person who replied to the video. I was, thank you. I appreciate it. It allowed me to really explain, I think, one of the biggest problems about the perception of Eldar players and the Eldar army in general. So, we'll see if people listen. Obviously, I don't think people really listen. A lot of people are just kind of set in their ways. They think they're right and they won't accept anything else. But those of you who are open-minded out there, maybe I'm not right on everything, but, at least examine what I'm saying and see, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I should spend more time figuring out how to beat these kind of type of abilities instead of thinking to myself, oh, they're just uninteractable and they're broken and nothing's ever going to be good about them, right? Because there's a lot of strong things in the game. Move, shoot, move is strong, but there's a lot of other strong stuff, right? So, anyway. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. And I do want to mention really quick that I do have a Patreon that is free to join. If you want to, support me, you can also do that. I do give paid members free access to videos and stuff like that, ad-free, on my Patreon, so you can check that out. You don't have to be annoyed with annoying YouTube ads and things like that. And God, is it just me or are the ads getting worse and worse? Honestly. But, that lowest level of paid membership is, I think, $3 a month. So it's really inexpensive. And I make about 10 videos a month, if not more. I've been a little slow in the last couple months, but it's going to pick up soon. Just because there hasn't been a ton to talk about, to be honest, with the edition, coming to an end and stuff. But in 11th edition, I'm going to be probably making a video every day or every other day. So stay tuned for that. I do have a Patreon or a Discord, associated with that Patreon. So if you want to join the Discord, talk to Eldar players and enthusiasts. And again, there's no hate in this Eldar Discord. Everybody's really cool. I haven't had a problem in years with anybody. And if there was a problem, it was like a little minor, little argument or something, some lore argument, of course, because everyone argues over lore, right? But I mean, that being said, everybody in there is great. And lastly, if you always want to talk to me and ask for my advice, I'm happy to give it. I'm happy to tell you what I think about your list. And, if you want to, schedule a call or a time to talk about something and you're a paid member, I'm more than happy to do that as well. And I don't usually put time limits on calls like that, because I don't know. Something about it doesn't seem right to charge somebody for it, but if you are a patron and support the channel and just show that you care about the Eldar community and stuff and, you want to build it up just like I do, then yeah, I'm willing to talk to you forever about Eldar and strategies and tactics and everything like that. You can ask me whatever you want. So join up if you want. Let me know. Join the Patreon for free if you want, even. And I'll send you the link. And you can join the Discord. So, yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Last thing, I do have a channel store page if you want to buy some Eldar inspired apparel. Really, it's not for profit. I know it seems like it, but I make very little off of that. It's really just chump change. And it's mostly because I want people rocking Eldar, apparel at their local game store and like rocking the Eldar and stuff. So that's really why I do it. But yeah, if you're interested in that, I got beanies, sweaters, all sorts of stuff with Eldar symbols and all that stuff. Eldar inspired, I would say. Check it out, and I don't think you'll be too disappointed. And yeah, that's it, guys. Have a good one. We're going to be back with a video on probably Harlequins, and I'm also looking at a few other videos and interviews and stuff this week, so we're going to be really busy over the next week and a couple of days before April. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.